Hey guys, so as usual, I wanted to provide a tier list of the best hand traps and staples for this current format. Now, at the beginning of the month, I also brought a breakdown of the most played hand traps and staples based on the first weekend worth of regionals. So basically, I kind of updated that with the most recent weekend worth of regionals and also some Dueling Book data from YGScope.com as well. And as always, definitely go check out those discount codes. Tier 0 Games actually restocked a lot of their singles on Maze of Millennia, Age of Overlord, and also the Rarity reprint set, so you can use code Akuna5 for 5% off there. And also same with Card Brawlers, you can definitely go check out some singles still for Maze of Millennia, for example, as we prep for Phantom Nightmare, and those pre-orders will be up soon as well, and I'll make some announcements when that comes to place. Okay, so let's just start with the staple tier list for this month, and so we're going to start with Ash Blossom. This was actually not first place last month around because it was actually Nibiru, but this time Ashes kind of took back its place. Of course, we are relying just on regional level data because we don't have any YCS level events so far post-balance from January, but nonetheless, this is the best that we have to work with, and Ash is obviously pretty generic. We're actually seeing an increase in like branded decks again, especially Despia, as you would have seen in like that regional top cut breakdown I did, and so also, of course, Rescue Ace is still like the best deck, or at least for now, and of course Fire King is going to be it was a very close second right now, but I'm sure will soon take over, and of course against, let's say, even like Labyrinth, which is another emerging deck thanks to the transaction rollback, Ash is obviously going to be really good and just useful against most decks. We also have Droll. This is still around. I mean, it's not really going anywhere. We still have Vanadium has actually been tearing it up at the regional level scene, doing quite well. You also have like Keshira coming back again. I mean, obviously if they have Shifter, you're not going to have to Droll, but otherwise Droll was typically pretty good against them, and just you also have a lot of Runic decks because for some reason that didn't get hit on the ban list, and so you're going to see a lot of that as well. So Droll is still going to stick around. Imperm, not much to say, very generic. Again, when you have something like Rescue Ace getting the most amount of regional tops so far, you're going to need some effect negation to stop the set 4. You also have Call by the Grave, so this is kind of interesting actually because the last few months this actually was not seeing as much play. It wasn't actually like a given in people's deck list anymore, but lately it's kind of come back. I'm trying to think of reasons for why, other than like hand traps obviously. I mean, I guess, you know, going second against something like Fire King, some kind of banishing thing like Call by the Grave is actually kind of nice, and it has like dual purpose, or rather multiple purpose. It's kind of like, you know, especially for example like during that DP format like a couple years ago now already, like obviously Call by the Grave was so meaningful in that regard, and pretty much every list was playing it. So, you know, when you have like multiple aspects that you can hit with Call by, it's always nice to have. And then Feather Duster, I mean, really nothing much to say. Basically, the cards in this kind of like, you know, quote unquote A tier essentially just represents kind of like the more default cards that you're probably gonna assume your opponent is on. And then we also have, of course, moving on to the next tier, Ghost Ball is actually quite good right now. And keep in mind, just even though it's, you know, this B tier, like any card that makes it onto this kind of tier list, like they're all good cards, and they're all actually seeing a decent amount of play. So just keep that in mind. Ghost Spell in particular has been good because of Fire King, because they do tend to come back from the graveyard. And of course you also have Labyrinth and Bell and Ash against, you know, Welcome or Big Welcome. Like they can be very impactful. So I think compared to DD Crow, which is also a good card, I think Ghost Spell is seeing a bit more preference over that card in particular because of that. You also have Talents. I mean, really, it's a good card, although it's not really seeing much in hand-in-hand play with along Thrust as much anymore. Thrust, the play of that has at least fallen back for now, but Talents obviously really good, and especially in today's game where we have something like SP, where you can probably always have something to link away your opponent's monster that you take, or maybe you can even make Typhon if that's the right choice and legal. So really good choice here. Nibiru, this has actually fallen off a little bit. In the first weekend worth of regionals, Nibiru was actually quite high, but since then, at least in the most recent weekend worth of regionals, it wasn't seeing as much as play as before. But again, still a really good card, and even heading into post Phantom Nightmare, really, you know, it's still going to be good. So definitely something worthwhile to have and something to respect. You also have Fenrir, which I was a little bit hesitant on including now, just because we have the rise of Keshira decks again, and obviously this is more like an in-engine card for them. But at the same time, you know, I kind of want to focus on decks technically that were playing Fenrir outside of Keshira decks. So kind of to be seen whether I continue to include them or not. Really depends on how much Keshira is playing. But, you know, Fenrir, obviously really good. Being able to banish face down is always nice against something like, I guess, like something like Fire King. You don't want to like trigger their like effects to kind of revive and everything. So that it is a pretty unique aspect to have. I also have Veiler, as I mentioned, you know, with Imperm, even Ghost Mourner. Like it's just nice to have some effect negation, try to stop that set 4. So next we have Cosmic Cyclone, which of course has been seeing an increase in play lately. So of course, I guess if you get rid of the Fire King's field spell, you know, it blows up their board, which from what I understand isn't always like detriment to them. But of course, you still have something like Labyrinth as well. Just getting rid of like their traps in circulation is kind of nice, I guess, just so they don't have it engraved, I guess, which kind of comes up actually once transaction rollback, or rather it's already illegal. So I guess some things to consider, but I think, especially also with all the runic decks that are available still, I think Cosmic is actually pretty important right now. Evenly Matched is another card that actually saw a big decline in play last month and maybe even the month before that. This was actually like the final card in last month's staple tier list, because it kind of saw a lot of decline in play, just because I guess maybe with like SP they can play around evenly quite well, but at the same time I guess it's kind of coming back. I did notice, for example, let's say with like Rise of Kashir decks, maybe that's obviously Evenly Matched is going to be pretty good against them, at least traditionally speaking. You still have like some runic decks around, right? And runic decks tend to play Evenly Matched just because they don't have a lot of engines, or rather they don't have a lot of non-engine space for a lot of hand traps, so they kind of like try to go for like these kind of bomb cards. So I think that's part of the explanation as well. And I mean, I guess you still have like Rescue Ace and Labyrinth, like being able to clear some back row is always nice, and Evenly Matched really strong at that. And speaking of back row removal, you also have Lightning Storm as well, which has been actually seeing pretty good amount of play the last half year or so. So another card that is worthwhile if you have the space. So now moving on to next tier, we do have DD Crow, and I just again want to emphasize that, just because it's in this quote-unquote C tier doesn't mean that it's bad. Actually, any card on this tier list, like, they are all good cards and worthwhile to consider. DD Crow, of course, again, something like Fire King can certainly come up. Just preventing them from coming back, like Kieran Pop, is like really annoying, for example. And against, like, again, Labyrinth, like if their stuff is banished, they for the most part don't have any way to get it back, at least not through engine, so can be really strong. You also have like some branded decks kind of rising again, and DD Crow can definitely be really strong against them as well. And then next we have Pankratops, that obviously came to 2 in this most recent January ban list, so you're gonna see some play, at least especially at the beginning, when people there's kind of like usually like hype with cards that just came off the ban list, for example. To be seen whether it continues, because Pankratops for the most part in the last couple of years has really saw a decline in play, and then especially with like Fenrir that came out, but then lately, just leading up to the ban list, it was actually starting to see some play again, and now it's at 2, so I guess you're seeing more play. You also have Droplet, which, even post the Rise Heart ban wasn't actually seeing as much play as maybe people would have thought. It still can be pretty good. I'm noticing this was kind of seen more so in decks like, let's say, Orcus, even like Phantom Knights. There were actually a couple of regional tops for those decks in the past weekend. And, those decks, like, you like really benefit from cards hitting the grave, or especially it's actually maybe even better than, being in your hand. So those decks, decks like that can really plus off of cards hitting the grave, I think Droplet can be really good. So next we have Super Poly, which is actually going to be pretty insane post Phantom Nightmare, just because of that new Yubel fusion, because of course it's just Yubel monster plus any effect monster, which essentially just clears like any opponent's board right at this point. It's too bad that it mentions Yubel monster as a fusion material, because if it just said Yubel, then you can actually bring it off, let's say, like fusion deployment, bring out Yubel, and then just Super Poly everything away. I mean, technically you could play like one of the older fusions, I guess. It does mention Yubel specifically, but maybe that's a little bit of a too stringent requirement. Next we have Dimension Shifter. This obviously is a very strong hand trap if you can play it, but just because of, purely from a representation standpoint among all decks, most decks cannot actually play Shifter. That's why it's usually tiered pretty low, but you do have the rise in decks like Kashir again. Flunder is still around, and that's probably why it's still hanging in there compared to last month, where it actually fell off quite a bit. Next we have Solemn Judgment. This was kind of actually seen a lot in the Kashira topping deck list. They don't really have like a built-in Omni Negate, so decks like that, even like something like Rescue Ace, usually is also shown to side Solemn Judgment for going first. And then we have some Bestials, which of course, you do still have some Bestial Runic actually, has topped a decent amount since the new format started, but with like top decks being like Rescue Ace and Fire King, they're fire, Bestials not the most amazing, but for the most part against a lot of other decks can be good. I mean, Labyrinth is going to be one of the better decks, Bestials can go really hard, and also of course I've mentioned repeatedly, but branded decks have been topping quite a lot so far, and Bestials are also very good against them. Thrust, on the other hand, is interesting. It's definitely seen a bit of a decline in play in the last month or so. Even this current month, I mean, really, a lot of the Thrust is just associated with like the topping branded list, because they typically play this for like, let's say fusion duplication. So it really has not seen as much play as before. I mean, I'm sure it will kind of go up and down at some point, but it is a very strong card, and unfortunately, reprinted soon. And then you just have Bestial Druid's Worm as well. Really just goes hand in hand with Magma. If you're playing Magma, you're obviously playing Druid's Worm as well, so not too much to say there. And moving on to the final tier, we have Crossout Designator. This is a card that hasn't seen as much popular play lately. I mean, it's usually seen in decks with like a very specific weakness to a certain hand trap. So, you know, Branded and Ash. Although for the most part, I think Branded decks don't actually play this as much anymore. They just opt to go with the Thrust route with Fusion Duplication. You have something like Manadium and Droll, and I was seeing some Cashier deck lists playing this as well. So, you know what? Can be good, I guess, if you have a lot of non-engine space, but definitely can make deck building a little bit weird as well. And then we have Ghost Murder Moonlit Chill, as I mentioned before, Imperm Veiler, you know, something against Rescue Ace and like setting 4 has been kind of like the popular choice lately in terms of hand trap lineup. And finally, we have Lava Golem, which actually was just seen in like the topping Kashir deck list, just because they don't really need their normal summon for the most part. So if you're a deck like that, then you know you have the luxury of being able to play something like Lava Golem or Sphere Mode, and you can really easily break boards that would otherwise be very hard, like such as like a Manadium board. So something worthwhile if you are able to kind of get by without a normal summon. Really good, and can also do some burn damage to boot. Alright guys, so that was it for the staple tier list for this month. Hopefully that was helpful. I definitely can't wait until Phantom Nightmare format. Really excited for that, and just with more tournament data post that format as well, so definitely stay tuned. And I'm also excited to do more vlogs when it comes to that new format as well. So anyways, huge thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to my patrons as always for the continued support, and well, take care guys.